this long-suffering person. So I am very, very pleased here to bring somebody into the stream. Actually, as I'm doing this, let me remove this. Let me remove, let's see, my scroll here, and let me pop up this. There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is good to see everyone here. And yes, I am very happy to introduce somebody who has been kind of a, I don't know if he'd classify himself this way, but I think I can classify him as kind of an RPG legend for sure with the games that he's been involved with. This is somebody who has worked previously on, as far as sort of lead title design in Icewind Dale 2, Neverwinter Nights 2, and obviously was directly responsible for Fallout New Vegas and remains the only game designer I've ever heard of who not only did New Vegas, but then came out with his own mod to make Fallout New Vegas even better than Fallout New Vegas, which is pretty impressive. And, of course, has also worked on Alpha Protocol. And the reason that he is on our chat today, of course, is because we have something called Pillars of Eternity that he knows something about. And so it is my very great pleasure to be able to introduce Josh Sawyer to the stream. Chat, can I get some love for Josh Sawyer? And Josh, thank you so much for being on with me.
Thank you for having me.
And what I'm going to do is I want to capture your picture here and bring you over so people can chat with you. Chat, so you know, I'm going to start out with a few questions, I'm going to bring up some questions myself. Then I'll have a chance to play through a little bit of the beta version, and then you guys will be brought in as well, and Josh will be with us for just about an hour. Josh, I guess I want to start sort of at the beginning of this, and that is when it was just Project Eternity, and it was running through Kickstarter. And I want to ask you about your experience with this in particular, because was this the first Kickstarted game that you had directly been involved with, or not? Have you done this before?
No, this was the very first Kickstarter project that Obsidian had been involved with. It was something that we had been talking about sort of off and on for quite a while, and it was half joking when we talked about it until Double Fine Adventure had their Kickstarter, and then we realized it wasn't really that far-fetched.
Not a joke anymore, yeah.
Yeah, so we said, okay, well, somebody's going to try to make a classic style isometric party-based RPG. We should be the first people to try to do that. And so that's when we really started kicking it into overdrive to get a plan together, get a project idea, get a presentation together. Adam Brennicky worked very hard on the whole pitch. And yeah, that was the first Kickstarter experience we've had. And I mean, I don't think any of us really expected it to do anywhere near as well as it did. A lot of us weren't even sure if it was going to make the initial asking limit, which was 1.1 million.
Yeah, really, so, even with your guys' rep, you guys weren't sure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had been through kind of some rough times with previous projects, and I don't think any of us wanted to be overly optimistic.
Okay.
And Double Fine Adventure was very successful, but yeah, I guess we didn't. None of us really thought like, oh yeah, this is easy slam dunk. Of course we're going to make this money. It didn't really seem that likely at the time. Like we thought we could do it, but I don't think any of us really had that level of confidence. So we were really, really surprised and happy, overjoyed that it got funded so quickly. And of course, the continued support we had throughout the Kickstarter campaign was amazing. And all the support we've had since then, both in the early stages of the Kickstarter, the backer beta, and now approaching the final release has been really humbling, and it's been really amazing for all of us here. So thank you to everyone who has helped out with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to follow up with the community support in just a moment. I guess the other thing I wanted to ask, if I could get you to take a step back and sort of look at the overall map of Kickstarters and games. I just recently interviewed Paul Neurath from Other Side Entertainment. They're doing, Underworld Ascendant. Obviously, I had the guys, Mitch Gittleman, and the guys have been on my stream several times from Harebrained Schemes to talk about the Shadowrun games. So, I mean, I guess it's obvious that it's somewhat of a trend in the games industry, but I'm curious from you, two questions. First of all, why do you think there's as much attention now being paid with Kickstarters and game developers, even very established ones, going that route? And then secondly, do you see that as a positive thing for the industry? Certainly it worked for you guys, but there have also been some rather high-profile failures on Kickstarter for games too. So I'm curious about whether you think it's a good trend and why you think it is a trend at this point.
I think it's a good trend. I think that, well, one, it allows fans and developers to try to collaborate to make types of games that might not be possible using a traditional publisher model or other traditional funding models. because often even a game like Pillars of Eternity, which is large in scope in some ways, is sort of a niche game. It has 2D backgrounds and things like that that a lot of publishers immediately sort of write off when they see them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a PC focused game, PC Mac Linux, which is another thing that a lot of publishers are just not particularly interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows us to try to pitch these things. And because the internet allows a lot of people to, like, there are fans out there of these niche or sub niche or whatever sort of genres, and they're really enthusiastic about it. And if they have a place where they can sort of focus their energy and their money and their attention and their comments and their feedback, it allows the developers to actually make that stuff. So I do think that that is very, very cool. Additionally, I think that when we do have successes, and hopefully Pillars will be a success story.
I think it will.
Thank you. If we have success stories, well, one, that means that it does mean that more crowdfunding it's more positive for crowdfunding overall, because people say, oh, look, this can work, this can do well. Also, hopefully to publishers, it sends a message that there are people who like these sorts of games.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to get not only into sort of the more niche markets or the mid-level markets where publishers might consider like, oh, okay, so this is viable, maybe it's smaller scale, but there's still a lot of people that are interested in it. So that might actually bring, because there's kind of when we stopped making these games at Black Isle, publishers said, or distributors would even say, well, no one wants to buy these games, so we don't want to fund them. And we're like, well, no one buys them because you won't make them.
Yep.
You won't fund them to be made.
Yep.
So I would hope that if we do have success stories like this through Kickstarter, that publishers will go like, oh, okay, well, maybe we were wrong about that, or maybe there's something here we didn't consider. So overall, I think that is a very good thing. I think that answers both parts of your question.
It does. So you would be happy to go down this route again, if need be, for a game in the future, either, you know, this particular, like the Pillars of Eternity franchise, or something else.
Sure, and I think we've already seen like the Shadowrun Kickstarter, which so the Shadowrun Kickstarter was very cool. The first release was awesome, and then the Dragonfall expansion was really cool.
Phenomenal, yeah.
Yeah, so that's really great. And now with the Hong Kong edition, it's sort of like a partial funding model, which is really great. I think that's also another possibility, is that not everything has to be, you know, please help fund all of this.
Right. Other side has done that as well, where they had apparently acquired private funding to a degree, and this was supplemental in a way.
Yeah, so I think as long as the developers are open with the backers and the fans about where all the funding is coming from and whom they're answering to and stuff like that, I think that's great. You know, there are other, you know, it can be a half sort of situation. So, yeah, so I would be willing to do it in the future, both for, you know, let's say maybe it would work for Pillars in the future. I don't know. We'll see. We might also have other ideas for games that publishers are not particularly interested in, but we think we think that people are interested, and also we're interested in making them. So we'd want to pursue that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me move that into a discussion about just briefly about the community that you brought up, and then we'll start up the game. And I obviously have, you know, some specific questions about the game, and I'm sure the others, a lot of people are chomping at the bit to ask too. About the community side, I noticed this as well. I mean, I've been over hanging out a little bit in preparation for this over at the Pillars of Eternity Reddit, and then obviously at your own Obsidian's own Pillars of Eternity forums, which are hopping, I would say. It's fair to say, very, very active. And the question I have is something which came up also in the other side entertainment community, and that is, there's got to be, I assume, some kind of a balancing act between the desires that all the community, which is now obviously monetarily invested in this directly, what they want from the game and what you guys are interested in providing. And I've heard very complimentary things said about you being capable of somehow navigating that while remaining polite when people are like, why can't I have everything plus my pony? But I'm curious about... I guess I'm curious how you try to strike that balance about how much of the community input, you know, can you take, what sorts of things, what's your guiding principle about what things you take in, what things you sort of say, you know what, that's just not the vision that we have. I'm wondering how you navigate that.
I think that when we look at, so even if there's a small group of people asking for something, I try to look at the whole audience overall.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of people that back this game, and a lot of people have different tastes. Some people play the game specifically for the story, or specifically for exploration, or Some people love the tactical combat. A lot of people really love the tactical combat and the advancement mechanics. Um, so one of the first things I sort of wonder when I hear someone requesting something is if we give them this thing and it makes them this much happier, is it how much less happy is it going to make other people who are definitely people that want to play this game?
Right.
So I think that's a big balancing act. Is a lot of times it's relatively simple. Like if it's something where it's just a toggle, like we can very easily make something switch on and switch off. And if you really like it, you can turn it on. There's no skin off our back or skin off our nose if we just want to say, like, if you don't like it, you can disable it. We've put a lot of that stuff in. When it's something that's as simple as that, that's great. That's easy for us
Yeah.
because then we can just satisfy everyone.
Right.
But all of those individual toggles and flags and strings and everything, those still do take time. So time is always a consideration for us. Yeah, in a lot of cases, it's sort of wondering, what impact is this going to have on the game as a whole? Because there are certainly people are very, very passionate, but the question is, even if someone is extremely passionate about one particular thing, if we change that thing or if we add that thing and it makes them 10% happier, but makes 80% of the people who are going to play the game like way, way less happy with it,
Right.
that's a very difficult thing to justify unless we can make it some sort of a toggle. So we try to listen to everyone, but we have to talk internally. That's another thing is that we read the forums, we talk internally, we read off-site boards. There are a lot of active communities, NeoGAF, RPG Codex, Something Awful, a lot of places that talk about the game off-site, and especially because the developers aren't there, sometimes it can be very useful to look at their sort of less filtered...
To eavesdrop, as it were.
Yeah, and I mean, the more remote you get, the easier it is for you to be assured that they don't think that you're watching or whatever.
Right.
But we just kind of try to take it all in. Sometimes we respond. Sometimes it can be unproductive to respond. It's more useful just to see the conversation.
Right.
But ultimately, we have to be responsible enough to make the decision, and it's not going to make everyone happy all the time. But we hope that it makes the best game overall.
But it sounds like you really did put a lot of value in literally, trawling for feedback. I mean, like literally trying to pull feedback actively.
Yeah, I mean, we have lots of people that give great feedback on our forums, especially for the backer beta, because those are people that are actively playing and they're finding either little bugs or big bugs, or they're just giving kind of opinions on balance issues, or sometimes it's more subjective. Like, they're like, I don't like the way that this class feels, which is not necessarily about how effective it is, that it just doesn't fit their idea of what the class should be.
Right.
So it's a difficult balancing act because different people have different preconceived notions about what any of these things should be, or what they should be in a Infinity Engine successor. So we just try to be mindful of that and just consider all the potential options.
Have there been, can you give me a specific example perhaps of a situation where someone, you got so much, feedback or continual movement in a particular direction from the community that you and the team were not sure about, but it was just such a, strong desire over and over again that you went with it? Was there such a thing, or has the community been somewhat in sync with you guys about what you wanted to do?
I'd say they're pretty divisive overall.
Okay.
I mean, and there are certain things like the user interface, although I think this is actually common to a lot of games. People have a lot of very individual and very specific desires when it comes to user interface. The aesthetics of the user interface, where they appear, how big they are, the style of them, even things like the color of icons, the size of icons. And that's why I think when you look at a lot of heavily modded games, UI mods are a huge, huge part of that. And not just that a lot of people play with mods, but there are a lot of mods, and those mods are extremely configurable.
Right.
So that's something where, I mean, there are tons of UI threads on our forums, and I mean, like, it's crazy because so many people have done their own mock-ups of like, I want this, and they're all way different, or I shouldn't say they're all way different, but a lot of them are very different.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the cool things is that we do have people that are actively making mods already for the game. So they've been making mods essentially for the backer beta, but I think they should just be able to roll over into the main game.
Wow.
And for something like UI, where it's really hard to make everyone happy with a default UI, I'm glad that there's already sort of an aggressive modding group that's already kind of doing stuff for that, because it's a single player game. You messing around with the UI is not going to make the game fundamentally worse. If someone likes the look or the feel or the layout of something, I'm really glad that the community can help create that possibility for people.
How open then is Obsidian going to be to allowing mods to be a regular part of it? I mean, are you guys going to be as actively involved in it as, let's say, Bethesda is with the Elder Scrolls games, where some people would argue that you need mods to make the game work? Or I mean, like, what is your sort of policy, if you guys have one, about what's going to be allowed for Pillars of Eternity mod-wise and what isn't?
I don't think we have necessarily an official policy, or if we do have one, I don't know of it.
Okay.
We do have a partnership, I believe, with the Nexus for modding. And I mean, there are a few complications for us. So we made the game in Unity, but we've heavily modified Unity. And when it comes to our maps, generating our maps is pretty complicated. It's not something where we're like, hiding the secrets about how maps are made. But it's a kind of weird, tricky process to render and export and then process and import all the maps.
Okay.
So that's something that we're probably going to be looking at long term, because it's a little difficult to deal with.
Okay.
However, a lot of people, like I said, are already making some mods. I think a lot of our stuff is fairly exposed in terms of data. So while we're not releasing an editor for people to edit that stuff, getting at that data shouldn't be particularly tricky.
Okay. So
I'm hopeful that if people want to make their own balance mods or gameplay mods or whatever, that they should be able to do that without too much trouble.
Okay, that seems fair enough. All right, well, I am speaking to Josh Sawyer, who's the project director from Obsidian for Pillars of Eternity, and it is wonderful to see all, at the moment, 172 of you. That's great. Cool. For those of you asking the questions, I promise I will open up the questions from chat in just a few minutes, but I do want to play a little bit of the game and ask some specific questions here, so hang tight. My name is Arvin Elleron, by the way, and thank you guys all for being here. All right, well, let me open up the game here so I can ask a couple of specifics. So let's slide over to the game itself. There we go. So I guess I want to ask, and while I'm at it, why don't I bring you over with me just a moment while I get your picture up here. So let me ask you a little bit about, for you personally, what sort of informed your design principles on this as you were working through? Obviously, you had the direct Infinity Engine experience, and so you had a lot of that you were pulling from, but I'm wondering if there were other significant influences since then from perhaps other games that you didn't design that went into this, that you could maybe bring up, or I'm just curious about what the sort of the generative lines of influence for you have been as you've been in the process of doing this.
Obviously, yeah, the experiences making the Infinity Engine games, also watching people play the Infinity Engine games. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the high-level decisions about how we structured attributes and our classes and how they progress, how weapons are balanced and armor is balanced, a lot of that was based off of watching a lot of intelligent, well-meaning, but inexperienced people try to play a D&D role-playing game and not know what the hell they're doing, because there's a lot of trap options and bad stats and bad weapons mm-hmm. and things you just fundamentally shouldn't do. And so we've tried to mitigate a lot of that. Also, I mean, I play a ton of tabletop RPGs.
Good man, good man.
I've seen people
Obviously,
make a lot
you should.
What's that?
I said good man. I'm a fan.
But I've seen people make a lot of the similar sort of problems in tabletop RPGs where they have a really cool idea for a character, but within that tabletop game, that's a bad character. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the kind of using vanilla rules in 3rd edition, saying like, I'm going to make a high charisma diplomatic fighter, single-classed fighter. Mm-hmm. That's a bad character. That's like a character that will be bad at fighting, probably, and probably also will be bad at talking. so it kind of sucks, because the person has a really cool idea for a character, but it's really bad, and not just a measure of like, well, it's slightly less inefficient, but like it's got some real fundamental problems. So when we looked at how we were structuring the game systems, a lot of consideration went into like, let's, as much as possible, let's try to support people's ideas for cool builds. Mm-hmm. If you want to make the guy who wields a single dagger, you're a rogue who wields a single dagger, that's actually a pretty decent character in our game. If you want to play a very smart barbarian, that's actually also a pretty darn good character in our game.
Okay.
So we've tried to support a variety of ideas for characters. Wizards can wear armor. You can wear heavy armor. You can wear light armor. There's no weapon restrictions. So stuff like that where we tried to say, like, look, if you have an idea for a character, you can play it. There's not a hidden danger to it. You can still have an efficiency fall off where you're not quite optimized, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as D&D usually is.
I see. Okay.
And then, we've looked at a lot of other games in terms of for inspiration for things like, so for example, we have a camping supply mechanic in Pillars of Eternity. So rest spamming could be a problem in some of the Infinity Engine games where people would just kind of spam rest all the time after every fight.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw, man, I'm going to get this wrong. I want to say it was either a Wizardry game or a Might and Magic game that came out within the past year, and it had a like a sort of supply resource that you use to camp, and that was kind of your tether for determining how many times you could rest and recover your abilities before you had to fall back and either get more supplies or rest.
Okay.
So that was an inspiration for our camping supply mechanic. And for us, it's scaled by difficulty. So if you're on easy or normal, it's kind of generous. Like you get a pretty good amount of camping supplies you can use before you have to go back and get more. On hard, it's more restrictive. You only have 2. So so we had inspiration from stuff like that. Inspiration from all of the editions of D&D. I guess not inspiration from 5th edition since it came out too late for it to be a big impact on us. But yeah.
Wow, it's interesting. So it's really pulling from all of those. And I'm also curious. I had this similar question for Paul about who obviously was coming from a game that was 20 years old at that point.
Sure.
But when you're looking back, and I mean, I'm currently doing a run through of the Infinity Engine games on my channel with some other streamers. So I've been working on Icewind Dale, and where's what we're on now, and we did Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and we're we finished the DLCs, the Tales of the Sword Coast, and all that stuff. And so I'm wondering what the line is between simple nostalgia, like, remember how great it was when you played this game when you were in college, or, and what you're, and really trying to kind of push the envelope for doing new things. And I'm wondering if you could give me a couple of specific things that you're able to do in this game now that you couldn't do back then, and on the other side, the things that you were anxious to preserve from those games back then, in a game like this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff that works great in tabletop D&D that just doesn't work well in any edition of tabletop D&D. That doesn't necessarily work well in a CRPG. So being able to design a rule set that was very tailored to making a game for the computer is nice, because we don't have to just throw everything in because it's in the existing system. We can say, like, well, this is not suitable for a CRPG environment, so let's not put it in. On the flip side, though, we have tried to keep the feeling of a lot of, so we still have kind of like a Vancian magic system with wizards. So wizards can cast a certain number of spells per rest, which is kind of like per day.
Right.
But you don't have to prepare them. You just have a grimoire that restricts how many you can or like which ones you have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have multiple grimoires, or you can switch the spells that are in your grimoire while you're not in combat. So, we kind of said, like, well, let's keep the feeling of you have a certain number of spells you can cast per rest, because that feels very D&D. And we have levels of spells like D&D. We don't have mana or anything like that for traditional spell casting classes. But let's kind of tweak how you access those spells, because there are some problems with how that can work sometimes in a computer environment. So those are sort of examples of things where we're like, well, like, let's keep the feeling of this, but let's tweak it a little bit so it feels a little friendlier for someone playing it in 2015.
Gotcha. Okay. So right now I'm in the character creation screen. Talk to me a little bit about the number of races that you have here. So some of these, human, dwarf, elf, those are things we've seen before. But as far as I know, brand new are the Amawa here, if I'm pronouncing that vaguely right. Amawa, the Orlin, and then the Godlike. And I'm wondering if you could talk to me about those 3 races, where those came from, whose brainchild those were, and if you can kind of summarize, because I think everyone knows the others, the basics of the others, but what about these 3?
So yeah, the core 3, we just kind of said, I think a lot of people who play fantasy RPGs want to play humans, elves, and dwarves.
Yeah.
And so we just said, like, a lot of people are going to want that. Let's just start with those guys. That's pretty straightforward. Not going to say that it's the most original thing in the world, but it was done again for that feeling of, like, a lot of people, if I can digress a little bit, a lot of people come to these games wanting to play the character that they play in a lot of games.
Right.
And a lot of times that's a human, an elf, or a dwarf. So we decided to support those right away.
You realize you're pissing off the gnome loyalists. I just want to say.
I know. Well, we did actually talk about that. We said like, well, do people? There are a lot of people actually that hate gnomes.
Yeah.
I don't hate gnomes. But there are some people that really can't stand gnomes.
Yeah.
So we talked about the other race. We talked about half orcs and halflings and gnomes, and we said like, do we really? Is it necessary for us to have these? And we decided no, it's not necessary. But we said we probably should have a big race, like a big powerful race, and we probably should have a small race to sort of stand in as the because half orcs are the big race and gnomes and halflings are the little guys.
Right.
So I came up with the idea of the Amawa, and they're bigger than humans. They're stronger than everybody else, humans or otherwise, and they're kind of a semi-aquatic seafaring race.
Okay.
There's actually a companion in the game who's a chanter, who's kind of like our version of a bard. And they're pretty cool. They're very powerful, and they have. And then the Orlans are our small race, and they are. Let's see, what's the best way to describe them? So they live in. They're sort of native to the area that the game starts in, and they make up a lot of the native population, and so they're viewed with some suspicion and hostility by the colonists in the area. And they've had a bad history with the people around them because they often get, I'll say picked on, but that's kind of an understatement. They get enslaved or kind of rounded up and killed. But they're a small, physically diminutive race that lives in usually the woods, and they have body hair all over their body. And it's two-tone with two-tone skin, so they have kind of a even more distinctive appearance. And they also have very long ears, like much longer than they're getting into elf quest territory.
Oh wow! Okay.
And also kind of like cat slit eyes. And so they're kind of cool race, and they have some neat abilities as well. They're known for being very known for being kind of dirty fighters. And they're also known for being incredibly sort of resilient and defiant toward people trying to control them.
Okay.
So, and then the godlike, just to be honest, those are straight up sort of plain touch ripoffs. Like,
okay. I wondered.
Yeah, when we were, and I don't want to overstate this because I only was very slightly involved in. Oh geez, why can't I remember? Mask of the Betrayer. When we made Mask of the Betrayer,
right.
We debated for quite a while, like what should the subrace be? And after a while, a bunch of people said, dude, just do Ganassi. People want to play Ganassi. They want to play plain touched. And so we supported that, and they looked really cool, and people loved them. So when we talked about having another sort of race type, just because people responded so well, and I think even in tabletop, people really like those, we decided to have the godlike. And it's kind of, if you mixed up the general ideas of Ganassi, Tieflings, and Aasimar, if you kind of combine them all with the idea of these are people who, when they were born, people believed that they were touched by the gods. And so they have these physical differences and these strange powers. And no one is quite sure exactly why this happens. They think it's because the god is either blessing or cursing the parents or the individual for some reason.
Okay.
And so they have very distinctive appearances. And they have these special abilities. And depending on where they are and what culture you're in, some people view them with wonder, like they think they're kind of amazing and holy. Other people think they're kind of an ill omen or cursed. And so they have kind of a difficult time in a lot of places.
I see. That's really interesting. And I'm actually, just as we're talking, I've made myself an Almana, coastal Almana barbarian, just because it seems somewhat logical. The might bonus. Well. And let's see. And as far as the culture choices here, is how much impact? I mean, I see that there's actually a mechanical impact to get resolve or constitution. Is that something which comes into the game? Will NPCs comment on not only one's race but presumably on one's background, if that's clear, or does it come in sort of as far as side quests are concerned? I'm wondering how else it comes in besides just the obvious mechanical stuff at the beginning.
It usually comes up. Well, I shouldn't say usually because it doesn't come up that often, but it comes up in conversations. So. When you're early in the game, you can define and flesh out a lot of details about who your character is and where they came from. And that goes into your journal. So it goes into your biography. It actually fills out a description of your history, which is pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
That's something that Eric Fenstermaker, our narrative lead, he really, really wanted to put that in. And it's very cool. So one of the early NPCs, Kalisha, asks you some questions about your background. And it's just a conversation, but as you're answering her questions, it's actually filling out your journal. So part of that is just for you to establish in your own mind what your character's deal is, which is kind of cool. But then also your background and your culture, period, like not super duper often, but every once in a while will come up as a dialogue option, or people will respond to you based on that.
I see. Very cool. Let's see. So just a quick reminder to everybody. Hello to the 204 of you I see in here now. I am very happy to have Josh Sawyer, project director for Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity, on chatting with me as I'm playing through the beta version that they were nice enough to send me. And so as I'm playing Kendall, as it were, with him, I'm also having a chance to chat with him about the different races, and then talk about the different classes. So let me just run quickly. You don't have to run through all the classes, but just as you were thinking about class design and class creation, obviously, again, you're trying to hew to that balance between doing something which will be familiar to people, a la the D&D style, the barbarians, the rangers, people like that, but also things that will maybe stretch outside of it. And so I'm wondering how much certain classes sort of went outside the bounds of D&D, how much stuff you wanted to create, I guess, from whole cloth, and how much of it was something that you tweaked as you went on. And did your mind change about how much to do that? Maybe you started wanting to tweak and then ended up doing more whole cloth things than you thought you would, as far as the classes are concerned.
It's tricky because there are now 5 editions of D&D,
Yep.
and all but one of the Infinity Engine games were 2nd edition D&D games. And so it's pretty tricky. With some of the classes, I tried to capture the feeling of some of the 2nd and 3rd edition abilities, but give them a little more oomph in a 4th edition style, like rogues, for example. Rogues are a class that I've always felt gets kind of pigeonholed into being a skill class.
Yep.
And by that I mean, like, you're awesome at skills, like almost to the point where unless you're using magic, no one can come close to you.
Yep.
But then in combat, kind of always feeling like a wet noodle. And so outside of your backstab or something like that. And 3rd edition helped with sneak attack. Pathfinder took it even further by removing a lot of the restrictions that were on sneak attack. But 4th edition was where I really felt like, wow, these guys feel like they're squishy, but man, they can hit hard. And it also felt a little more like, yeah, like rogues they're good at sort of thiefy skill things, but they don't, it's not as necessary. So we tried to push for that, and I think we've struck a pretty good balance. There are still people that really don't like that. There are still people that really do want them to be a skill class, don't like that because they're offensively, like, they're really, really good.
Yeah.
And so we've tried to kind of tune that to make it feel good, but traditional as we can. There are other ones where it's difficult, like Rangers. Rangers are a class that has changed quite a bit over the editions. So finding the right balance with them was very difficult. For them to make them distinctive, one of the things we did is we made sure that they all have animal companions. Animal companions are just part of the class. And
you've done some changes on that, right? I mean, I remember there was the whole health loss when the pet dies, and you've made some alterations, I guess, in response to community feedback about the companions.
Yeah, it was both community feedback and also actually the main reason why we changed the shared health thing is that it was very tricky to get working properly. And if something's that tricky to get working properly, it makes it very hard to balance.
Yeah.
Like, well, how do I balance this when it's not even working right? So because there was already negative feedback about it, and it wasn't really vital, and it would be a lot easier for us to implement and balance if we changed it, we're like, well, there are a lot of things that are saying we should probably just change that. So now I think it works pretty well, though, because if the animal companion goes down, or if the ranger goes down, the other suffers a penalty for it. So it's not something you don't really want to use them as kind of a meat shield, because you kind of stink for the rest of the fight if they go down. Like you suffer some kind of bad accuracy penalties and stuff like that. But it feels like they work pretty well together. With barbarians were another one where it felt like, well, how, like if rogues are really hard hitting, and fighters are really durable and reliable in terms of damage output, like where does that put the barbarian? And so what we settled on is barbarians are great at groups. So if you have them go one-on-one with something, like they're still pretty good and they can get all pumped up and raged and, you know, frenzied and go crazy. They're probably still not as good as a rogue. Rogues can just be withering. But a barbarian has something called Carnage, that all barbarians get something automatically called Carnage. And whenever they attack a target, they automatically get additional reduced damage attacks at everyone around that target.
Wow. Okay.
And they also get a bunch of other abilities that are basically like, please come to me, children, like everyone gather around and get murdered. And so they work really, really well if you want to just wade them into a group of guys. They do really great damage.
So you're allowed to be a barbarian playing as a barbarian, in other words. In other words, there's not, you know, sometimes I get the impression that people want to play in a particular style, but they're punished for it because the game just doesn't really allow for it style-wise, not just class-wise and race-wise, but how they want to actually, you know, play the game and engage themselves. That's fair to say?
Yeah. And it's always very difficult with a class-based game, because what does barbarian mean to someone? I mean, what does rogue mean to someone? What does fight, like for some people, fighters, like some people are like, no, fighters should not be defensive sort of characters. They should be the primary damage dealers, and they should also be really durable. And it's like, well, okay, this kind of gets tricky to figure out. You know,
right.
Like for example, for paladins, that was something early on where paladins were built to be very defensive and very support oriented. And there were a fair number of people that said, like, no, dude, like, I want to hit hard. I want my paladin to go up and smite evil and just beat the shit out of this guy. And so I'm like, okay, like, how can we support that without really making them feel like they're overshadowing fighters, barbarians, rogues, or monks? And so we developed a number of offensive things for them that feel pretty good. They still feel like they're very, very good at support stuff, but they have enough of an offensive edge that I think when they hit hard and you feel good about it. So there's been a lot of that sort of stuff where we implement something, hear feedback from people. And like I said, it wasn't necessarily that paladins were mechanically not good. It was that the feeling of the class didn't match the person's idea. Like, no, like my idea of a paladin is this, so I want to be able to do that. But so we've done a lot of iteration on that.
Yeah, I was going to say the interesting thing about that, and by the way, no, White Fox, you did not offend my portrait selection. I wasn't totally happy with it initially either, so I think this is better. And I'm going to be able to type in chat, but I had a couple of problems where I clicked outside the window and we got a little bit of a crash, so I don't want to do that until I'm into the game and I can save it. You know, that thing about you just mentioned about these iterations that you've gone through, that strikes me as being... I like hearing things about feel, and that is very tabletop-y to me. I mean, I heard this is a lot of what Mike Merles and those guys were talking about in terms of constructing classes for 5th edition, which I think they did a tremendous job, and I love 5th edition. And I think part of it is that they spent so much time getting the feel right, as opposed to one of the criticisms that was made of 4th edition, which is that all of the classes were more or less mechanically felt the same. Like a rogue was kind of like a wizard with knives, but it was basically similar things, similar cards, similar feats. They sounded different textually, but they didn't feel different. So this sounds to me like very much a feel thing. I think that's a little unusual to talk about that in a computer game context, but it's good to hear.
No, I wouldn't say it's that unusual. I will also say that 4th edition critique is a little bit bullshit. Like, I don't disagree that, especially if you look at the structure of how classes work in 4th, and this is something we did try to avoid in Pillars of Eternity. I think we did a decent job of it. So in 4th edition, one thing that is absolutely very samey for everyone is how people get powers is very similar for every class. So level to level, like you're all getting your dailies, your encounters, your utilities, and everything like that. In practice, they actually feel quite different, and they play very differently. But the fact that everyone advances in such a samey way, I think that, especially classes like Wizards, where it was very different, that was a very different feeling for people. It's very difficult to argue with feels. It's like, this doesn't feel right. And it's like, you can say that that's ridiculous, but that's not a counter. Like, that doesn't help. So when we were looking at how we were structuring our classes, things like mana felt wrong for Wizards.
Okay.
Things like making them get spells in the exact same rate that other classes got abilities also didn't quite feel right. You know, per encounters felt like a cool thing for classes to have, but not everyone gets access to them all in the same way. So we've tried to strike a balance where it's like, yeah, there are some things that are similar in how classes advance, but in terms of how they acquire powers, how those powers work, I think that those feel pretty different. And so I think that we've avoided that kind of trap where it's just like, well, everyone just kind of feels like they advance in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. Well, I've popped myself onto the screen here. We're actually playing. And right off the bat, I see that we've got tab highlights things in the screen. That's lovely. And of course, the formation. I see the formation makes a return from the formation square, where you can choose formations. Yep. You have makes a return. Now, in the game itself, when you actually start out, do you start in the game proper with this many people, or you just start with yourself and then find these other people as time goes on?
So when you first start the game, you start out with the character you made, and then you get a short-term companion.
Okay.
We want to do that right away, just so the player understood, like, hey, this is kind of, you don't have to play it as a party-based game, but we wanted to make sure that you understood, like, this kind of is designed to be a party-based game.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you start out with a companion right away, so you understand you have multiple characters that you can select and control. They have their own separate abilities, but you can multi-select them and have do basic things together, like move and attack. So yeah, you start with one character, and then later on you can get access to up to 8 companions.
Wow.
And they're all optional. And you can only have a total of 6 party members, so your character plus 5 additional ones.
Okay.
If you don't want to take the companions, or if you don't like a specific companion, you can either ignore them completely, or you can make adventurers. So if you want to make an Icewind Dale style party, you can start doing that pretty early when you get to the first town. You can just start building up. And if you want to make a gimmick party of 6 rogues or a paladin and 5 priests or whatever other sort of weird thing you want to come up with, you can totally do that. That was something we wanted to support, is if people wanted to make sort of theme parties or gimmick parties or whatever the heck they wanted to do, we wanted to let them do that.
Okay.
And we also didn't want people to, like, we are happy that a lot of people do like our companions, but we know that even the people that like our companions sometimes don't like a specific companion.
Right.
And so that's great. Like, they don't have to suffer through that companion if they don't want to. So if you meet my companion that I wrote, Palagina, and you don't like her, that's fine. You can just make your own paladin and join the party and leave her behind.
So in a way, that sort of splits the difference then between what you got in Baldur's Gate, where, you know, part of the characters like Minsk were part of the appeal and the charm, and something like Icewind Dale, where people could make every character that they wanted all by themselves. You're trying to, in a way, kind of get the best of both worlds, it sounds like.
Yep, very much so.
All right. Now I'm given the, I'm trying to find out as I'm talking to you how I can actually, there's my guy. Okay. Never mind. I wanted to see that it's nice that, thereby proving the success of the RPG, I'm immediately able to level up. So that's just to prove to you, chat, that I am so skilled that my starting the game has given me the experience necessary. So, okay, let's talk a little bit then about, first of all, this UI that people were talking about. I'm going to do this stuff with leveling up later. Yes, cancel the level up. I'll do it later. So let's talk about the sort of the look of the whole world. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you guys were imagining, because some of it obviously feels very similar, the UI as well. And one of the great thing about the Infinity Engine games were the amazing two-dimensional backgrounds, those maps. You know, I still think for my money that the Kuldahar two-dimensional map is one of the coolest things ever. And just is just one of those things that people always remember. So what was sort of your governing principle when you were thinking about how to design? Because you said yourself that these maps are not that easy to, you know, program and set up. And so I'm wondering what your principles were as far as the graphic design of it and what you wanted people, what was the effect you wanted people to have as they went into the game and saw these graphics in front of them?
So first and foremost, we wanted people, when they looked at the game, to think that's an Infinity Engine game. Like, just right away, we wanted to make sure that whether we chose wood or metal or stone or anything for our UI, we wanted to make sure that the overall, like, right away, your reaction when you see the game, even for a couple seconds, is you go like, that looks like Baldur's Gate, that looks like Icewind Dale. So part of that, the individual component of them was our user interface had to feel, it had to be a skeuomorphic GUI. So it had to feel like it's made of physical things like metal and wood and stone that you actually, and have sort of UI sounds, hopefully, that reflect the movement of those physical objects, because that's a very Infinity Engine thing. We also wanted to go for an isometric perspective. We wanted a 2D backgrounds rendered out in an isometric perspective. And when our characters were being designed, there were specific things we tried to avoid. So we tried to not go, like when we looked at inspiration for armor and weapons and things like that, we tried to avoid kind of the 2000s overall. Like when you look at the design of fantasy in terms of the color palettes and in terms of the stylization of armor and weapons, it changed quite a bit over the past like 10 or 15 years. And so we tried to look more at the early 90s and the late 90s for the style that we went with.
Okay.
So that's a little more restrained, a little less exaggerated. The colors are a little more subdued. They're not quite as vivid. And similarly, when we designed our background, our environments, we tried to go with very realistic proportions on buildings and structures, realistic sort of tones. Our lead artist, Rob Nestler, our art director at Obsidian, actually, he wanted to use the inspiration of the Hudson River School painters, which is a much more kind of subdued color palette.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go through the environments, there are some colorful environments, but overall it's not very, very intense in terms of saturation.
Okay.
So those were a lot of the influences that we sort of tried to pull from when we were putting this together. Because when we look at the Infinity Engine games, that's the sort of stuff that we saw across all of them.
I see. Yeah, that's and yeah, this, as some people have been saying, it looks gorgeous, and it really does. And that struck me even when I played this back, the version back at Gen Con, as you mentioned to me off air. It's come a long way since then, and I can tell. But even then, I was really impressed with sort of the look. What about, by the way, just quickly, one other question about that: the zoom. Even zooming out, it's not zoomed out as far as you could theoretically zoom out with the original IE games, and I'm wondering what the principle was behind that. It's not good or bad. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think we constrained. We kind of have a practical constraint to how far you zoom out based on some of the. I think there's actually a filtering thing that starts getting weird when you zoom out too far.
Okay.
I think that might be something we look. You can actually unlock it. It's something that you can unlock like users can just unlock it and change it if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
But zoom levels are always a tricky thing because there's always a fear that people will, I don't know, like zoom out too far or to zoom out.
Fly too close to the sun.
Yeah, like, and I mean, I'm not super concerned about that, but I know a lot of people were concerned about that. So you can zoom in reasonably close now, because the characters will break down if you zoom in close enough. They're not really built for super close examination, and the backgrounds are obviously, well, they're 2D, so they'll blur out.
Right.
But yeah, we have been tweaking that a little over time. So, I know that people can change it in their own user files, but we might also just give a slider for that in the future.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, let me ask one more of these, and then because I know Chad is chomping at the bit, I'll throw it open to them. So as I'm sort of looking at, and yeah, you're right. Just as I entered the inn, I immediately had this nostalgia effect with the Infinity Engine being inside it, and that's really cool. So the voiceovers I wanted to ask about, just because I had seen this come up on the forums, that there were a lot more of the sort of voice talent and voice acting that people had initially expected. And this is a matter of some debate depending on the game that you're playing. Mitch and the Harebrained Scheme guys have said that they just have no, they're not interested in doing it all. It's a very text-heavy game. They don't want to have any of that happening. Others have taken the approach, BioWare among them, that, the more voiceovers you can have, the better. So I'm curious about how you guys planned in how much you wanted to have voiced and how much not voiced for the character to read and for the player to read, and how much not to.
Well, the first thing we did is we talked to Chris Parker, who is one of the owners at Obsidian, and he was the producer at Black Isle for I think both Baldur's Gate games, but I'm pretty sure BG2, and a lot of the other Infinity Engine games. And we said, Parker, how much of this was voiced? We just said, like, what's the standard here that we're sort of looking at? Because we knew we were going to write a huge game with a lot of characters, and we couldn't voice everyone's lines. So we looked at that, and then based on the budget that we had, we kind of went back and forth. Actually, we went back and forth a lot on it, and we decided that we had a cast of characters that felt good, and within each character we had a certain set number of lines. So with the exception of one or two NPCs, very few characters in the game are fully voiced.
Okay.
There are a few characters that are fully voiced, but usually what we do is we use like greeting lines and then special lines for companions, major NPCs, things like that. So that was kind of the thought process that went into it. We like that voice acting can add a lot of characterization, to a character, but also we know a lot of people want to read at their own pace and will skip ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it actually does complicate our pipeline because when a line is written and it's intended to be recorded, it has to be finalized a lot earlier in the development cycle.
That was what
And
Mitch
then,
said. Yeah, yeah.
and then later, if you want to change it, you're like, well, this it's already been recorded. Crap. So it becomes really kind of problematic later on. So we went with a sort of mixed route where some stuff is voice, some is not. And yeah, and we're very happy with the quality of the voice acting we got out.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And yeah, that's more or less that kind of jives with what, as I say, Mitch's and some others had made some questions as first. Mustang, a cross between Fallout and Baldur's Gate, which is good. Well, that I wonder why. That would seem to fit. I'm speaking to Josh Sawyer, who is the project director for Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity, and this game is going to be coming out a week from today. And as he said, this is the last day for them to do fixes, so I don't want to keep him over long. So with that, I will open it up to chat. Now, again, there's 232 of you guys in here, so I will do the best I can. I cannot answer or have him answer every single question because the poor man, you do want a game from him, I assume. So I will simply open it up. The way I would like questions to happen, please, is simply to type in all capital letters question, and then give me the question that you have after that, and I will answer, ask as many of them as I can. I will make adjustments if the question is not necessarily, if it's already been asked and answered, I'll do what I can. And the thousands of questions pour in, as I might have expected. Okay. Let's see. Duscalt Coatson asks, question, anything else besides the dialogue system or Chris Avalone that you shared with the Torment Tides of Numenera guys? That's true, since we're talking about the Infinity Engine style games. Did you share anything else with them, with those guys, or vice versa?
I mean, we shared the engine stuff, engine technology. We've talked with them at various points, especially programming wise. They've come over and talked to us about how we set things up and structure things. In addition to the sort of engine things we did, also the dialogue editor, which I think might be what you're referring to. But otherwise, it's been a pretty light collaboration so far. But we know a ton of those guys over there. We used to work with a lot of them, so have very high hopes for Torment.
Yeah, so do I. Let's see. Glaber Zutwitch asks, regarding modding, will you export scenes like Wasteland 2 did? If not, why not?
Could I ask for a clarification on what he means by export scenes like Wasteland 2?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure either. And I have to say I have not played Wasteland yet. So maybe a clarification if you can, Glaber. He also asks, why do you restrict, or let me ask about this. I have to actually get into combat so I can see for myself. Why do you restrict combat movement as much as you do? And I'm going to have to play it myself to actually, I'm going to have to get into a combat now to see what he means, but.
It's basically to help with positioning and holding position in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not actually that restrictive. So we have a system called engagement that is similar kind of to the movement-based components of attacks of opportunity in 3rd edition. So when you get near an enemy and that enemy engages you in melee, if you move away from that character after you get close, then that character will take a free attack at you, and it can hit you. And then that character can't re-engage you for a couple of seconds. So yes, if you get close to a character and they do engage you, moving away from them is as penalizing as it might be in a 3rd edition game.
Yep.
But otherwise, I don't think there are that many restrictions on it. Yeah, it's early on. I think that the engagement system was much more punitive, but it's not very punitive now, and mostly it just helps with holding a line. So, for example, if you want to have a couple of characters up front and you're concerned about people getting around behind, the engagement system can help to, you don't have to physically block the entire route. You can actually engage those characters,
mm-hmm.
and they can step away from you. And some AIs are set up so that when they get engaged, they will not try to get away. Some are set up so they say, like, I don't care, I'm going to try to move out of engagement as soon as possible. And those characters will try to move away, but you'll get a free attack at them when they go.
Okay, fair enough. Let's see. Biza Genius asks, looking at the Stronghold gameplay that's been shown so far, it looks kind of empty, though we're obviously looking at an early game stage. Will there be an abundance of NPCs and interesting characters that we can interact with in the Stronghold?
I wouldn't say that it's abundant, no. The Stronghold is, it's pretty cool. There's not like a ton of NPCs that are always running around the Stronghold. That never happens. That would be very cool. That scene is actually very complicated though, and as we started developing it out, we realized that there were a lot of potential problems with having a lot of NPCs spawn at the Stronghold. So yeah, I know that a lot of people want to see, especially a scene like that, be really bustling with characters. It doesn't usually get like that unless you have an attack on the Stronghold, and then you have like bigger fights where all of your hirelings and stuff can help you defend with your party. But that's why it's kind of more on the light side NPC wise.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Let me see. Uamaz asks, how do you think the current character level progression will scale in an eventual sequel where higher levels are reached? Yes. Will we have the sword of castle slaying at some point in these characters' development?
I mean, that's something that I will have to see how this goes because there are so many combinations of classes and abilities and races and equipment and stuff like that. We've done a lot of testing internally to see what sort of crazy things we can come up with.
Okay.
And every day people come up with crazier things. I mean, one that I saw recently was one of our testers had a Bleakwalker Paladin with a specific set of talents and a specific weapon that could get a 400 damage crit on a single target, which was not really intentional. So, but the thing is, like, he hadn't found that until kind of recently. So we don't know exactly how it will scale in the future because there might be things that are in this game that make scaling a little bit difficult. But we do want it to scale in such a way that when you start, if we make a sequel and we go on to the sequel, we don't want people to feel like the balance is just getting stupid. Mm-hmm. So what I would say, though, is if that means that we have to kind of change some of the core mechanics or how some of the bonuses or talents or abilities work in a sequel to make it feel fun over the course of that game, then we're going to do that.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see. Professor Faust wants to know, will we be able to view the game manual prior to launch? And I'll add on to that. I saw someone on the forums asking today if it was going to be a full-out awesome, IE style manual, obviously in digital form, that we're going to see, or is it more like, a couple of sheets for the manual? How comprehensive is it?
It's in between that. So
okay.
It is not like when we went back and we looked at the Infinity Engine manual, some of those were they're really big. They're like books. So we weren't able to get something that long, but it's not a couple of sheets. So I can't remember the exact page count. It's in between sort of Infinity Engine and Baby Zone.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly when people are going to be able to access the materials versus the actual game. Gotcha. Sorry, I can't answer that. I just don't know.
Okay. Let's see. Kuzin Quores asks, let's see. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Snowlawopes asks, how is the solid UI evolving? Did Kaz get the chance to polish it before the game went gold?
I don't think Kaz has spent a lot of time working on the solid UI recently. There were a lot of other things that he needed to work on. But what is in there is functional. He's mostly been working on other user interfaces, though.
Okay. Let's see. I think I've already asked some of these similar. Let's see. Gray Zero asks, I love some of these names. Is there a big feature or quest or area that you wanted to implement but couldn't due to technical time or budget constraints? And I'll add on to that. If so, could such a thing be added in, later, or would you be interested in that? I don't want you to think in the future when you haven't even gotten to the present, but I guess I am curious about if there's stuff that had to stay out.
No, it's less about big. I don't think there's any like big features like that. I guess the thing is, at the end of their project, there's always a lot of disappointment where you look and say, like, I really wish we could have gotten around to doing this one thing, and then multiply that by like 300. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the way it is. It's not usually like, oh well, we never got to implement multiplayer or something, which was never a consideration for us. We were never going to do multiplayer.
Right.
But that's like a big feature. There's nothing like that in the game. There are tons of like little things where we say, like, I really wish I could have changed this comprehensively, or I really wish we could have iterated on this a little more. But I think the end of every project is like that. You can't do everything you think of, and you can't tune everything exactly where it's going to be to make everyone happy. So I think that's sort of the feeling at the end of every project is I wish we could do a little bit more on a lot of things, but that's just the way it goes.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to get a chance to actually try this Oh my goodness. That hit my guys. That's what happens when I roll a ball of flame at me. Okay. Great success. Okay, let's see. I actually asked before about how the background choice for our characters affect the world, and I think Josh has already answered that there will be some dialogue. In fact, while I was in there, they just based on the racial choice, they said, you know, a big fellow like you should be able to handle that ogre that's in front of you. So I assume there's more of that sort of thing that's going to happen over time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. People do respond to your racial choice, your they respond to your race, they respond to your culture, sometimes your background, pretty rarely. Sometimes they respond to your gender. Sometimes they respond to, a lot of times they'll respond to your reputation. So if you have a reputation within a community or for being a particular type of character, they'll respond to that. Yeah, and things like that.
Okay. Let's see. I should clearly back my priest up out of the front lines. That's not how to do it. Oh, and now I'm getting to see the... Well, I'll get a chance to talk to you about the death rolls in just a minute, I see. Okay. Let's see. What are some of the craziest concepts the team came up with, character or monster-wise?
Oh, craziest concepts?
Mm-hmm.
Early on, there were some really, really weird looking, like... So if you think of D&D characters like Flumps or Zorns...
Yeah.
So we had some ideas. We said, like, well, let's write them up. And we wrote up some characters like that. We didn't do those because they're like, anytime you make a creature that has a very unique rig, like an animation rig, like a Zord or something that's really insane, and it's not shared with anything else, it's a lot of work to get that done. And then unless you reuse it, it's not a great investment because you just get one character out of it. So there were a lot of like weird looking, weird limbed, weird jointed creatures that we had, or I shouldn't say a lot, but a handful that were cool. They had interesting concepts behind them. But we just said like, these are going to be really a lot of work just for one character. So we didn't do those.
Okay.
And then there are a number of, I'm trying to think of an example, but the spell document is full of, especially for wizards, has a lot of kind of really weird stuff. And some of it we just said like, oh, geez, this is going to be a huge amount of work. One thing that went in that I really like, it doesn't get used that often, but when it does, it's very funny. There's a wizard spell called Minor Grimoire Imprint, and when you can cast it at an enemy wizard, and it will steal spells out of their spell book that you can then use for free.
Oh, okay.
So that was actually a very complicated spell to implement.
That's neat.
And it's just kind of like a neat thing where you can just be like, oh, there's another wizard, and you, oh, hey, thanks for the fireball, blam, blam, blam. And it actually doesn't count when you start casting their spells. It doesn't count toward your daily limit, so you can just kind of chuck them out for the duration. Which is
very
fun.
neat, very, very cool. Let's see. Let's see if I can actually survive this fight. I think I maybe will at the cost of at the cost of all of my guys, but whatever. I'll have somehow gotten through it.
What are you fighting?
I'm fighting a bunch of beetles. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have. You may not have the stream up at the same time. I am at the moment. I am fighting a bunch of beetles in the wilderness.
The beetles used to be really, really hard. I think they're much easier now. Hopefully that you'll be okay.
I did in fact survive.
Okay.
So that was I have successfully defeated beetles, and I don't have to turn in my role player badge. Okay. Let's see. Rulkda asks, or I'm sorry, I'm probably not pronouncing that right. Rulkdar asks, what was the reasoning behind implementing the stash instead of a standard in most RPGs, but more realistic inventory management system that requires to take encumbrance and space into consideration?
I would say the majority of people that played the game didn't like that.
Okay.
Like, they didn't like the limit on that. I think on almost every RPG I've played, people have wanted, they always want more, and they get annoyed by limitations on that stuff.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that there should be no limitation at all. So that's why we have the stash. And the stash can be set up in such a way and used in such a way where it is fairly restrictive. So I guess what I would say is if you go back to D&D, go back to tabletop roots, when your character exceeds an encumbrance limit, usually this is how almost every game I've ever played goes down. At the end of the session, you say, hey, dude, we go back and make a few trips and we take all that stuff out. And the GM says, yeah, okay, it takes you a few hours and you get it out.
Indeed.
When you do that in a CRPG, you actually have to do that. Like, you actually have to lug every single thing out. So we implemented the stash as a way of saying, you can offload all this stuff into this sort of secondary space, and you can optionally say that it's not accessible unless you're in a camp or a town.
Oh, so you can
say,
toggle
like,
that one way or the other.
yeah, you can toggle that. So that goes back to sort of like setting up options for people. So if you want to make that more restrictive and say, you can pick this up right now, but if you put it in the stash, you can't take it out again until you go back to a town or you're at camp.
Okay.
If you really just don't like that restriction, then you can just put stuff in the stash and take it out whenever you want. So that is an option that is open. I guess one of the things is, like, gameplay wise, there's nothing particularly challenging about picking up inventory and managing weight and stuff like that. And so if it's something you enjoy doing, then you can restrict those slots by turning that option on. If you don't like it, just turn it off.
Got you. And I do think you're right that the toggling, obviously it's not just as easy as that for you guys, but creating a toggle
it does cause some complications.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not so. Why don't you just add a toggle? I'm sure it's not as easy as said and done, done as said, but it does seem to be something which people really react positively to. It's just more and more options that are available. Let's see, G227 Mustang. Hi, Shoemane. G227 Mustang asks, question, what are the definitive system requirements? Are there any chances they'll get lower than what we've seen on Steam?
I actually can't answer that question. I'm sorry. I don't know off the top of my head what the latest specs are. I did look at them on Steam today, but I don't know how current those are. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Novalock asks, what is your favorite class? Why?
I think Monk. I think Monk, yeah. I like Monks because you can build them to be relatively passive or pretty offensive. So if you want them to be a little lighter management, you can build them that way. I like the kind of mechanical balance of, they take wounds. As they take damage, they get a wound resource, and that wound resource can be spent on powers. I like the kind of trickiness of trying to balance their damage intake with preventing them from getting overwhelmed and annihilated.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get abilities that I think are pretty fun. Like, I really like using Force of Anguish, which is the knockback one, because that sends guys flying. That's really fun. And then there's Torment's Reach, I think, is another one where it's a jump kick, so it looks cool and it's pretty effective. And then there's a late game ability you can get with monks called Flagellant's Path, which is kind of like a quick teleport over creatures that screws up everyone between you and your destination. And that's fun. Like in the late game, when my character was just racking up wounds, I was zipping all over the battlefield, just smacking guys. So that was a lot of fun.
Nice.
But yeah, I also like wizards a lot. I think they have a nice variety of spells. They're very flexible. It's fun to kind of strategize what spells I want to put in my book, my grimoire, and then kind of very carefully go through them during a fight, especially difficult fights, and decide, okay, now is the time to use this spell or that one or whatever. So they have a lot of neat stuff that you can use.
Okay, very cool. Let's see. What feature, Snowlops asked, what feature are you the most proud of now the game is gold? I don't even know if you could narrow it down that far, could you? Or maybe not.
No, I don't think there's a single feature I'm really most proud of. My hope is that despite all of the different sort of tastes that people have for what they want out of an Infinity Engine game, I hope that we really deliver on that. Because I know that these games mean a lot to a lot of people, and they mean a lot to people for different things. Sometimes they played them at a point in their life where they were going through hard times, and the games were one of those things that kept them going.
Yep.
Or they really had a strong attachment to the characters, or they just really love the challenge of tactical combat. And it's difficult to fulfill the desires of everyone for those things. But, we've really tried to capture as much of the spirit of those games as we could. So we really, really hope that people enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. It seems reasonable to me. All right, just a couple more, and then I'll let you go. I do appreciate you staying on with us, and I want to keep you too long on a day like this. Let's see. Ansim asks, druids in many ways seem to be more powerful spellcasters than wizards. Is the aim for them to be more powerful, but wizards more versatile, or should the power levels be similar between them?
I do think that some of the druid spells are more macho when you compare them to the sort of wizard equivalents. I could be wrong on this. I think that tuning, especially with spellcasters, can be very hard because there are so many spells.
Mm-hmm.
But in my experiences playing with our druids and our wizards, I like the range of spells that wizards have a little more. I just think they have some stuff like, so for example, there's a 3rd level spell that wizards get called Miniletus Bounding Missiles. And there are so many times where I'm like, God, this spell is so crucial right here. And there's a lot of stuff like that that I feel like for wizards. Don't get me wrong. I think druids are really powerful. They do great damage output. I don't think it's like really severe. I mean, I could be wrong. And if there's some big discrepancy, we can probably tune that. Certainly, there's certainly no one in QA ever complains about, and I don't have any complaints about the damage output of wizards. They're pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of my take on it, is that wizards are supposed to be the more versatile class. Druids kind of tend to have just the heavy damage spells.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. A couple more. Can you describe the crafting system of the game and what kind of items you can craft? Yeah, because that's something, of course, that was not really available, at least in Icewind Dale 1 or the Baldur's Gate, as I recall. The crafting
Sure,
stuff.
it's a little tricky because a lot of times people are talking about different things. So one thing is, if you look at especially BG2 and actually Icewind Dale 2, there were special items that you could make as part of a quest. Like you could assemble the parts of like a mega weapon.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really a crafting system, but those are things that a lot of times that's what people are asking about. Just in case, we do have at least one, I think 2. Actually, we have 2 quests that are like that, where you assemble something together. We also have a crafting system that is specifically for consumables, and that means food, potions, and scrolls. So that crafting system, they always take, for food, you get these sort of raw food items, and those raw food items can give you little bonuses over long periods of time. But if you use them together to make like the actual dishes, then those dishes can be consumed for bigger bonuses over a longer period of time. And then potions and scrolls are consumables, and you can make those through the crafting system as well. The enchanting system is another thing, and you can access that from the description window of any weapon, armor, or shield. And you can use that to add enchantments to weapons, armors, and shield that you already have. The main purpose of that, so early on, that was wide open. You could put almost any enchantment on anything. And we had a lot of feedback where people didn't like that aspect of it. They wanted the unique items to feel more unique, and they wanted the upgrades to be a little more just focused on making the weapon more viable over the long term. So for example, a lot of people have this experience where you find a cool suit of armor or a cool weapon early in the game, and it might even be unique, but over time, it just doesn't stay competitive.
Mm-hmm.
So our enchanting system moved toward that sort of a focus where you kind of go like, you know what, I really like this armor. I like the look. I like this property, but I'm not doing the job. So you can keep upgrading it. And that allows those items to remain competitive over the long term of the game if you want to.
Okay, that's a good answer. It sounds like you did a good job balancing that out as well. Yeah, and it sounds like it was not the easiest thing in the world. Okay, let's go with a couple more, just 2 more. Fortune Tech asks, this has been asked several times, so what real-world history and philosophy influenced lore and high-level world design, i.e. souls, deities, politics?
I would say, I mean, I thought about colonial American history, just interaction, not just colonial American, but colonial, like European colonization, and just how the interactions between different cultures kind of worked or didn't work over time.
Okay.
Misunderstandings of things that led to conflict, lingering sort of prejudices that happened in societies, or even in our case might remain in societies. In terms of real world philosophies, I don't think I would say that there are real world philosophies that impact things, but I would say that the themes of the story are things that we try to make that feel like they have real world analogs. So for example, a lot of the themes in our story have to deal with sort of having control over your personal identity, that sort of makes up who you are, how people use technology to sort of make progress or do even bad things in the world. So the use or misuse of technology for various purposes is an important theme in the game and in the setting.
Okay.
And so from that perspective, that's something we try to make because it feels like things that, well, they've really been relevant for a very long time, but because technology continues to accelerate at a faster and faster rate, it becomes more and more difficult to I guess, ask the questions that we want to ask about, hey, should we be doing this? Or how should we be doing this? Or what should we be using this technology for? That's a more difficult question to answer when technology comes so fast. So we've tried to bring those themes up because they feel like they're things that we care about now, and hopefully that will translate to you sort of caring and thinking about it in the story.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Let's see, one more if I can. Let's see. I think I got a bunch of people here. Okay, good. The Beatles almost got R, but they didn't, Thorg. I survived a second time against the Beatles. Let's see. Actually, two more because they're the last two that I see. Gray Zero, does in-game time affect any quests or events, such as certain events only happening during a certain daytime, or quests failing after a set amount of time?
I don't believe we have any quests that fail after a certain amount of time, but we do have one or two. It's a very small number, but we do have one or two quests that are only available at certain times. So like times of day. So
gotcha.
You come to a place and nothing's going on, and there's sort of an indication like, oh, this is weird. And then you can come back later and things change. So that's a very small minority though. So I don't want to mislead people and make them think like, oh yeah, it's all over the place. But there are a couple that do that.
Interesting. Okay. And let's see, the last one that I wanted to ask, because I think this is a good one. Oh, wait, I have to ask you just briefly because they told me to in the forums. Pickpocketing. They were very anxious to ask you about pickpocketing. Pickpocketing. Where is it?
So,
will it be there, etc.?
No. So no, pickpocketing as a skill is not in the game. Pickpocketing can occasionally happen through dialogues. And so the way we do that is we use your dexterity score to determine if you can swipe something from someone.
And I think I'm doing that right now, actually, because I'm in front of this statue, and it went to this dialogue where you have several options, and I think if I'm doing this properly, it's making choices based upon my strength level and things like that. So that's
So there we have things like that where it's gated by your ability scores and stuff like that. Again, that's not a very common thing. However, stealing from containers is definitely a thing that you can do, and something that I did all the time in my last playthrough.
Okay.
So if you go into stealth mode and you can go and pick a lock and open a chest before you get detected, you can steal out of it without getting in trouble, basically.
Okay. So it does. So see, I did ask. You guys now all heard it. You're all witnesses. Let's see. This is I think you mentioned Carnage. Were you the one who mentioned Carnage? They all have.
Barbarian.
Okay, so I'm going to take that. All right, and then the last question, which Natas asked, and I think this is an interesting one. Do you play the games you make after you finish them, or are you burnt out of the game for putting so much time into them from development? And I'll take that an extra step and say, how does designing... I mean, I know as a writer myself, I still, of course, love to read, but I feel like I read now for different things than perhaps the awe and wonder and immersion that I would have when I was just not writing. I mean, I'm picking up on issues of craft now that I didn't before. It allows me to read in a deeper way, but there isn't as much, or it's harder to find sometimes the, wow, just completely lose myself. Has that happened with you as well when you play games, either your own or others? And what is it like after you're done with a game like this? Do you still want to go back and play it?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm constantly going back and playing them all the time, but I have and do play games after they come out. With New Vegas, I kept playing it to look for balance issues and things over the long term, especially when the DLCs came out. That's why I made my mod, is I kept going with it and saying like, okay, what still feels rough? Like what's missing? What doesn't feel right? And so there was a lot of playtesting involved in making that mod as well, and I enjoy it. And with Icewind Dale 2, a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but Icewind Dale 2 has a number of starter parties. So if someone doesn't want to make 6 3rd edition characters right away, they can just use a starter party.
Right.
And all the starter parties were made by Black Isle developers on the team. And the one requirement of their inclusion was that they had to actually beat the game with that party. So
I see.
Those were all combat tested throughout the game. And afterward, I think we did a little more playing on that just to kind of get a feel for the testing and stuff like that. But with Pillars, I just recently finished a hard playthrough.
Okay.
And that was pretty draining in a lot of ways, but also very eye-opening. Doing a full playthrough on hard after working on a game for 2.5 years can, you've seen the game in so many different forms for such a long period of time. It can be fatiguing. It can also be frustrating because sometimes you'll come across something and you'll be like, this isn't fixed yet. We're like, God, why is this balanced this way or something like that? So,
Yep.
but it's very important to actually play through the whole game and see everything, or at least as much as you possibly can. I think that after this game comes out, I'm going to go back and play it some more. Obviously, we're going to get a lot of balanced feedback with such a wide array of characters and classes and everything. I know we missed some stuff, either things that are really bad, like this ability isn't good, this character concept is really bad, or there's really insanely overpowered stuff, or just things we missed. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go back and play it some more and look at the examples that people give us and stuff like that, so we can tune it and fix it in the future.
And as far as the enjoyment level, do you still find, great enjoyment on the game side, as, with as much experience as you have in game design at this point? Do you still find, obviously you enjoy it, but is it the same kind of, can you get immersed, I guess? Can you lose yourself in a game still?
I don't think I can't get as immersed as I used to. It's a lot harder for me to become get super excited about a game, because a lot of game promotion is hype. Mm-hmm. And I can see through that shit. So, like when a trailer comes out, like we look at it and we're like, yeah, that looks cool, but that's bull. Like, that's not actually going to work that way. That probably is not going to be that fun. So we kind of look at, I think developers overall start to look at things with a more maybe cynical or critical eye. It doesn't prevent us from having fun, but it does kind of put, we look at it in a different way, I think. I can still have a lot of fun with stuff, but I don't think I ever fully turn off a part of my mind that is sort of asking what, at any given point when I'm having an experience, I'm thinking about, like, what are the things that are contributing toward this feeling this way, mm-hmm. whether it's good or bad. So that's kind of crappy, but it's very helpful.
Yeah. Well, it's the sacrifice you make to be able to produce these games. Well, I know that I've actually kept you a little longer than the hour, so I want to make sure that I give you a chance to let you go. But
I do want to ask one thing. Very early on, someone had asked a question about exporting Wasteland 2 maps.
Oh, yes. He actually, yes. So he did actually confirm. He did. I did see that. He was asking about Unity 3D engine. He just wrote Unity 3D engine, I believe is what I saw.
So our levels are Unity levels. They're made very differently from Wasteland 2's levels. If he's asking about the file format of the level and the data itself, I don't think there's anything that's particularly crazy in that. The issue is more that generating the 2D art assets, and not just generating them, but all the different layers of them, because it's actually not just a 2D bitmap. It's 5 different maps that get cut up into different pieces.
Okay.
And then they're exported and re-exported. That's the process, the art process of making the art and then splitting it up and bringing it back into the engine. That's the hard part. That's the thing that's, like, very tricky. So it's just hard. And so we're going to look at it in the future, but I'm sorry if that's not a great answer, but that's the best I can give.
No, I think that is a good answer, and it, since I wasn't sure what he meant even by the clarification, now it makes sense.
Okay.
Now that all that stuff comes together. Chat, can we get some serious love in here for Josh Sawyer? And as I say, I mean, just having had a chance, I did have a chance to play about 10-15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, in prep for this, and I played it again another 15-20 minutes when I was at Gen Con a while ago, and yeah, I mean, it looks like you guys have hit this out of the park. I'm really looking forward to seeing this next week. And again, I really love the balance of the old and the new. I get frustrated sometimes as an older school gamer. I'm 42 now. I get a little frustrated with the people who are kind of like, the only legitimate games ever released were the following. And I like people who are able to draw upon the greats of the past, but not leave behind what we've learned in the present. So
yeah, thank you. It's a very tricky balance, but hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate it. And we best of luck. 1 week from now, I'm going to be playing it. A lot of other people will too.
Thanks
so much, Josh.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. Cool. Very neat. All right. Give me a second. All right, I got most of them in there. I'm sure there were a couple that I missed, and I'm sorry about that, but I wanted to be able to get a chance to do that. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview, and if you liked what you saw and heard, I hope you will follow. I'm not stopping the stream yet, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. I'm not yet. Yeah, if you guys liked what you saw and heard, I've done a number of these interviews, including ones with Mitch Gittleman from Harebrained Schemes, Paul Nurath from Other Side Entertainment. I've talked to the folks from Tin Man Games, from Dejabon Games about Elegy for a Dead World. I've talked to the folks from Stoic Studio for the Banner Saga and many others. So if you like what you heard, then please make sure to follow the stream. I would very much appreciate that. And I am going to play a few more. I am going to play some more of this as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you for the follow, Mortified Penguin. I apologize, by the way. I know a number of you were following both before and during the stream, and I just didn't want to keep stopping and saying thank you, thank you, thank you. But please, thank you to everybody. I really very much appreciate it. So thank you guys so much. For those of you who missed this, thank you, Enthalpy Flow. If you guys missed this, remember that this will be archived on my YouTube channel. Once the stream is complete, I will upload it, and I'll also highlight just the interview portion of this, and I will put that up both on my Twitch channel as a highlight, and then I'll also bring that over to YouTube. But I would not expect to see all of that until probably tomorrow, because I'm going to stream tonight. I've got to take care of my dog, and then when I come back, I'll probably play for another couple of hours, I would say. So probably don't expect to see it before tomorrow morning by the time all is said and done and uploaded, but it will be uploaded, and you'll be able to see the interview. You'll be able to see, my playthrough of this as well. So that is the deal. Oh, cool. Thanks, Cello. Dragon. Yes, very much. And yes, Paul is going to be visiting us again. And also Mitch Gittleman and those guys from Harebrained are going to be back when Shadowrun Hong Kong actually releases. So that is going to be happening down the line as well. Okay. So with